Hi, Glenys.
Hey, Aaron. What do you want to talk about today?
How much I hate diets.
Yeah, diets suck.
So what do you do instead of a diet?
Intuitive eating, health at every size.
So how many times have you had to explain intuitive eating and health at every size to someone?
Like 5,000 times. But that was just to my doctor.
Okay, so how many times have you explained it to someone and then they said, but diets are the only thing I know?
That's like every time. Can we pursue health without thinking about weight?
Yes, we can pursue health without thinking about weight.
That's pretty revolutionary, what you just said. But what if you just don't like yourself at the size that you're at?
I think we need to understand why, instead of just saying I need to change.
So what's the deal with body positivity?
Oh man, that's a long answer. I'm Aaron Flores.
And I'm Glenys Oyston. And we are
Dietitians Unplugged. All right, welcome back for another episode of Dietitians Unplugged. How you doing, Glenys?
I'm doing good.
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
Always. So today's episode is another interview. We got to sit down and talk to Dana Sturtevant, who is a dietitian and co-founder of Be Nourished in Portland, Oregon.
And we love Be Nourished.
Oh, I'm like a total groupie.
Yeah.
So at this point, anything they sort of put out or do, I have a very keen interest in, and I'm a part of their 6-month body trust certification program. I'm about, I would say, a third of the way through, and it's life-changing and professionally changing.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah. And it was exciting for me. We got to meet, or I got to meet Dana and Hilary, both of Be Nourished, at Beta last year. And it was so much fun to be able to talk to them.
Yeah.
In person. Yeah.
So let me just read Dana's bio. So Dana Sturtevant, she's a MSRD, and she's a trainer, mentor, Kripalu yoga teacher, and dietitian specializing in health at every size and intuitive eating. She's the co-founder of Be Nourished, a revolutionary business helping people heal body dissatisfaction and reclaim body trust. A member of the International Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers, Dana has facilitated more than 300 workshops throughout the United States for healthcare providers looking to enhance their skills in behavior change counseling. Her work has been featured in the Huffington Post, and you can find her and Hilary at benourished.org, and we'll put links to that in our show notes.
Yeah. And I think we just, of course, love Dana. So we just wanted to have an excuse to get her on and talk.
Pretty much.
And we just kind of talked about stuff.
Yeah.
But I think dietitians especially will find this episode really instructive. And, we kind of meandered into talking about yoga, which I was kind of thrilled about because it's just something I'm thinking about, but also I'm hesitating on. So it was kind of this cool conversation that, she just dropped all her knowledge on us, and it was really useful for me personally. So selfishly, this episode's for me.
Absolutely. And so I think everyone is going to get a lot out of it for sure. And it was, like you said, it's just great to sort of hog her to ourselves.
Yeah.
For about an hour.
Yeah. It was great.
Yeah.
All right.
Anything you want to plug before we?
As usual, I'm seeing clients in my Brentwood area office in LA. And I love working with people with binge eating disorder and eating disorders in general. And people who are stressed out about their weight and chronic dieters. And yeah, I'm just loving my work. So please get in touch with me if you want to work with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you?
I'm still doing my 100 Conversations with Men on body image. So if you're interested in participating in that, I would love to hear your story and hear about how body image has impacted your life. You can, if you're interested, you can email me at aaronfloresrdn@gmail.com. And I am also seeing clients in my private practice here in Calabasas, as well as via Skype and all those other telecommunication.
The magic of technology brings us to your living room.
Yeah.
Which sounds creepy when I say it like that.
No, but it's creepy, but it works.
But it's great. And I love working with people via video, actually. It works pretty well.
Yeah.
So work with us both if you're looking to get free of the food crazies.
The food crazes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So without further ado, here's our interview with Dana Sturtevant. Well, I'm super excited to have you on the line, Dana, and thanks for joining us for this podcast.
You're welcome. It's good to be here.
So, full disclosure, Dana is leading a certification program that I'm doing with her partner, Hilary. And so, like, I have like rock star moments in my life. So, to have like some time alone to talk to Dana about all this stuff is like super exciting for me. So,
you're just basically doing this for extra credit, right?
Pretty much. I'm hoping like it'll actually relay in a higher grade, because from what they told me, they're just looking for C work. So if I could come in with D work, then I'll really just get a C and I'll be good.
Perfect. Shoot for the stars.
But seriously, thank you for coming on. This is a real treat to be able for us to be able to share your wisdom with our listeners.
Oh, well, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the nice little intro too.
Yeah. So I'd really love to start hearing by hearing a little bit of your journey about how you became a dietitian that was, and the non-diet, right? That sort of rebuffed diet culture, and how that came about for you.
So when I moved to Oregon 16, 17 years ago, I started working in research for a group of investigators who were primarily behavioral psychologists, and they had been using a 6-month intervention to help people lower blood pressure, reduce cardiovascular health. And I was hired to come on and work on a blood pressure study. And eventually the studies went more towards a weight loss focus, and particularly a maintenance of weight loss focus. And the 6-month intervention these investigators had been using for, I think, even about 20 years. And the intervention worked in bunny ears, it worked.
Air quotes, yeah.
In air quotes, exactly, that people lost weight while they were in the study doing this 6-month program. And yet, of course, at 2 years out, people tended to regain the weight that they lost. And so the investigators wanted to study some follow-up methodologies to help people maintain the weight loss. And as I was working for them for about 7 or 8 years, I started to wonder why we were talking to people about their health or about their weight. I was wondering why we had a weight loss focus at all. And when the data, of course, at 6 months, people's weight was down, but at 2 years, their weight was back up. And who did the investigators blame? They thought the intervention worked, in air quotes, and I thought the intervention was the problem. They thought we should follow up people for many years and maybe kind of micromanage them and offer coaching and online support programs to help them keep the weight off. And I was starting to think that the intervention was the problem. And so I started to feel unethical in my work. And of course, none of the investigators that I was working for, and none of the people in the research group that I was working with, believed that we were promoting dieting. We all believed that we were promoting healthy lifestyle changes, because we were all aware that dieting didn't work and that dieting had a 95% failure rate. But now, when I look back, people were dieting. We could call it whatever the hell we want. People were there with a dieting mind, and that's something that I've learned. And when I started to step out of that research job, is about the presence of a dieting mind and the qualities of a dieting mind. And when I saw the qualities of a dieting mind, I was like, well, this is what clearly the research participants were in the dieting mindset, and the dieting mindset is what doesn't work. So we have all these people in present time offering mindfulness programs and offering all these different things under the guise of lifestyle change, but they're promoting weight loss and promising weight loss and have a weight loss focus, and we know now that if you have a weight loss focus, you're going to be dieting no matter what we call it. The researchers weren't interested in doing a health at every size intervention, and I knew nobody was going to hire me to do that work in the world. And so I started my own private practice and started weaning myself from that job. And it was as I weaned myself from that job that I discovered intuitive eating and the qualities of a non-diet or a dieting mind and what a non-diet mentality looks like. And I also discovered health at every size and a growing community of healthcare providers that are concerned about the health effects of the war against obesity. And I put that in air quotes as well.
Yeah. So it's when you started that private practice, then did you automatically, even maybe not even knowing about health at every size, maybe apply some of those principles before even sort of knowing it?
Yes. It was, I knew that I wanted to have a different conversation with people about health and weight and self-care. I knew that there was something missing in the interventions that I worked with in the research studies. I was really curious about yoga, and having been a yoga practitioner and seeing how yoga changed my relationship with my body, I was really curious about the mindfulness and self-acceptance practices of yoga and how it can help people change their relationship with their bodies. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this work was because it didn't seem to matter how much weight people lost in the studies. They still didn't like their bodies. They still found there was something problematic about their bodies. So they might like the number on the scale, but they didn't like the size or shape of their body. And so all of these things kind of led to me wanting to have a different conversation. And I knew that it didn't exist in its entirety. I knew, it was like something I was going to have to create. And I really wanted to partner with a therapist, which is funny because then a couple months later, I met my business partner.
Yeah. So I'm a Be Nourished groupie. So that's your business, Be Nourished. And so as a groupie, I am really interested in how you met Hilary, and especially like you said, you were looking for a therapist because I think one of the things that I find is that partnering with someone else who has a similar mindset helps sort of solidify some of our work and our own confidence in the work. So I'd really love for you to share how you met. How did Hilary come about, and how has that enhanced your own professional career?
So when when I started to create my own practice and move towards a vision I didn't really know, then I certainly would not be able to, 17 years ago. I think it was probably 14 years ago when I was getting disillusioned. I certainly would never have been able to say that what I'm doing today is what I wanted to do. There was no real articulate plan.
Yeah.
I just knew I wanted to do something different. So I found a private practice in Portland that was looking for a dietitian to help them lead a program that was wanting to help people with around weight and health concerns using a different philosophy, which today is a philosophy I wouldn't get behind, but back then it sounded better than what we were doing, and I didn't have all the information I have today. But anyway, I started my practice there. I had an office there, and within a couple of months, Hilary was brought in as the therapist to help lead these groups for this woman who had started this private practice. And we started facilitating this group for this woman. And in the meantime, Hilary and I started talking about the work that we were interested in doing. And we started a group for women called Making Peace with Your Body. And we started facilitating that group together. Hilary had a support group that she had led with women who had weight loss surgery and were and were really struggling to figure out why they'd lost 100 pounds and still hated their bodies. And why wasn't life better? And so Hilary had this group of women she'd been working with, and I'd been working in my research field, and we started this Making Peace with Your Body group. And it's in group work where we really developed the language and philosophy that is Be Nourished today. Within a very short period of time of being at this clinic, we realized that the person running it wasn't a good fit for us. And the clinic basically imploded, and we decided to leave the clinic. And we didn't have a business together then, but we wanted to go and have an office together somewhere. And we said, why don't we get some business cards printed and share a tagline? And I said, I really like this name, Nourish, this word nourish. So I would love to use something with the word nourish in it. And Hilary came up with the active phrase Be Nourished in searching for domain names. So that's literally how it came to be.
I love it. I love it. And again, so much has grown from that, from that one group.
That's correct. Yeah. And we led that group for years. It was 12 weeks. It was 8 weeks. It was 10 weeks. It was 14 weeks. A couple years ago, we landed on the name Body Trust for our intellectual property, and we changed the name of the group to Body Trust Wellness. And we've been offering that group under the Body Trust umbrella until very recently. And so we probably offered the first group in 2005, and here we are in 2017. So yeah, we've been doing, this kind of group with people for over 12 years.
You've been rebelling against diet culture ever since.
Correct. Yeah. And certainly in the last 5 years, really, our work has really been heavily rooted in social justice, which has really strengthened the work and changed it in pretty significant ways.
Yeah. You did a great Facebook video recently. It was a wonderful rant, and I watched the whole thing one night about how, we've got people that inspire us on one level, and then they just go ahead and they sort of betray us, like, in some other way. And you sort of touched on, like, Janine Roth, just sort of how she's sort of slipping more into diet culture. She's always been sort of, kind of anti-diet, it seems like, and she's sort of slipping back into this. So that what inspired that video that you made?
Well, that video I made for a group of people in a online community we call the Body Trust Network. And Hilary and I do a monthly video message to the group, and we're always basically speaking on some topic for the members of this community. And it's not a rant. Typically, it's not a rant. That's not what the video message is not.
Yes, and when I say rant, of course, you did it in your lovely voice and your very gentle and inspiring way. But it was I recognized it as there was some frustration there too.
Oh my God, it was a rant, but no doubt about it. It's just not typically what the content of those video messages were. But that day, I had to record this message, and it was during that week that it was between Janine Roth being on Oprah and Oprah saying super diety shit, and then Janine Roth saying nothing to counter it, knowing that there are so many people that are Janine Roth followers that are watching this, listening to her as basically Oprah makes statements that do not support Janine's philosophy. And who knows? I mean, maybe Janine spoke back to her, but they edited that part out because Oprah has a stake in Weight Watchers and didn't want it to affect her stock and whatnot. So we don't really know what happened in that Oprah interview, but I can't remember exactly what Oprah had said, but it was something about points and deserving and all this like externally directed eating stuff. And Janine, at least the way they edited, she didn't say anything about it. It looked like she completely agreed with it. I'm also aware she made some statements about sugar in that, and how she doesn't eat, she doesn't restrict sugar, but she recommends that she recommends that people restrict their sugar. So there was a lot in that. And then if the other thing that had come out that week was I think it was the Academy of Eating Disorders had published a paper like about anorexia and obesity treatment. Is there something we can learn from people who severely restrict their food to help people manage their obesity, in air quotes? And it was just the combination of those two. And then I think Brene Brown was posting about her 30-day Whole30 shit. And then the Monastery woman had posted something about her being on the Whole30.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And she's a woman with an eating disorder history. And I was just seeing all these powerful women basically doing harm. And so that is what led to my rant for the Body Trust Network, because I had been face palming all week and I was tired of it.
Yeah. I think what's so important for me, and I think for listeners too, is this idea that these people that we look up to, that, do some really important work, are not immune to diet culture and the influence of diet culture. And part of, being a rebel against diet culture means you butt up against these things really quite often. And what I think was so, like, hearing you speak what you spoke was so great, because it sort of like says, holy fuck, this is really annoying. And how do we sort of reconcile these things, but also how do we stand up and stay strong against like an onslaught of diet culture messages?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's such health. There's so much healthism in this stuff, and people who have big platforms spewing off their personal food philosophies like it's nothing, like it's no big deal, under the guise of health and self-care. I just felt like somebody needed to be out there countering that and talking about the harm that does. Personally, is starting to be seen as one of these leaders. It's an interesting thing. Like, I'm a human being. I'm going to make mistakes. Mm-hmm. I don't expect my teachers to be perfect. But it's interesting as somebody who's some people may put on a pedestal, to be talking about this is really interesting to me right now.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think that's an important part, and I'm glad you bring that up, because, the folks we just mentioned, Janine Roth, right, Oprah, they're people too, and we all, have our own sort of struggles and things where we are, we're not, like you said, we're not perfect. So I appreciate you adding that.
Dana, I just wanted to go back to when you had said that your work was focused more on social justice. And I just wanted to get you to talk a bit more about what that actually means and what that looks like in practice.
Well, I mean, I think when we look at some of the people we're talking about, Janine Roth, we're talking about Brene Brown, we're talking about Glennon Doyle Melton. I mean, these are white women. Most of these food philosophies that are being taught, put on pedestals, are developed by white people. It's pretty classist. You have to have a lot of money to be able to do these things. You have to have time to be able to make your food. I think a lot of this, we live in a society right now that when we talk about healthism, we're talking about the belief that if you get sick, it's your fault. And if you're not eating correctly and taking care of yourself, and I put that in air quotes, that you are morally a moral failure and you're doing harm to society. And I think from the one of the perspectives of this work we're doing is to really encourage healthcare providers not to hide behind this personal responsibility rhetoric that we hear so much in healthcare, And while we're ignoring the social determinants of health and how poverty and racism impact health, how, we're not paying people living wages, which impacts health, the effect of stress and oppression and stigma impacts health. And that's when I think of social justice in the arena of our work. It's our job to call out all the isms: ableism, sexism, racism, healthism, nutritionism.
Yeah. So how did you first get exposed to this? Because I think there are not many dietitians, therapists, people doing this work that are coming from this angle and using this information as a way to bring into their work. So what was your first exposure to this? And for someone who's sort of new to it, maybe just hearing it for the first time, how can they become sort of more informed in this area for their own work?
When I look back, I think the first ism I read about was nutritionism in one of Michael Pollan's books. I think it was in Defense of Food, which is also the first time I heard the phrase orthorexia, which is people who obsess about eating correctly. And it's probably the eating disorder that's most on the rise right now. It's hard to convince people that they have an eating disorder because we live in a culture that's so obsessed with morally righteous eating and healthy eating. But I heard this term orthorexia, which helped me start to see some eating disorders that didn't really fit under the weight spectrum of eating disorders. It was more, there was something disordered about it, but it was hard to name. And so I read about orthorexia in that book. And I also read about nutritionism, and he wrote about the nutrition industrial complex. And in nutritionism as an ideology, it's not based on fact, it's an ideology. And so this idea of the nutrition industrial complex being the nutrition scientists in the food industry, basically. And I think that like the food writers and people who write and blog about food, I think that's what he called the nutrition industrial complex. So nutritionism was one of the first isms I had read about in Defense of Food book, but it was going to Linda Bacon and Lucy Aframore's Hayes training up in Seattle that Opal Food and Body Wisdom put on many years ago, where we had a day on social justice issues that Lucy presented. And I remember looking over at Hilary at one point, and she was in tears. And that was when the seed was really planted and things started to shift for us, where we started to see and become more aware of the social determinants of health, how poverty and racism and forms of oppression impact our health. And these are things that are outside of people's control. If you want to read about it, I think Linda Bacon and Lucy Aframore's book, Body Respect, is a great introduction to the social justice in the arena of the body and health.
Awesome. I think that's a great resource as well. It's a fantastic book.
Yeah, and the Association for Size Diversity and Health has some information. The Binge Eating Disorder Association has a strong social justice focus in their conference, their annual conference, as well as on their website. And, the bottom line, when we're talking about body liberation, which I feel like is the arena that Be Nourished is working in, is this idea that all oppression is connected, and we cannot fight one form of oppression without fighting other forms of oppression. I think it's interesting when we look at size bias and we think about social justice. It's very common in conferences around social justice that the arena of the body is left out, and sizeism isn't seen as a form of oppression, because there's still a lot of people out there that believe that, if you're fat, it's your fault and you have a choice and you could do something about it, which is why it's not seen as a form of oppression like racism and sexism and transphobia and all these things. So I think our job is to make sure that sizeism is included in the social justice, in the arena of social justice, and that it's included in conversations and in conferences, because we know how much weight stigma impacts people living in fat bodies. It impacts all people, but it particularly affects those that live in fat bodies. I don't know how articulate that was, but that's my response.
No, I think that's great. So one of the things that I really take, and what I really enjoy talking to you is you are very intentional with words, and words and language are really important. One of the things that Glenys and I have talked about on the show before, but also we just bat around all the time, is like words like body positivity, body acceptance, body, you've chosen body trust as something that you use in your work, but also like words like weight neutral, weight inclusive. I think there's a lot of different words that get sort of thrown around, and we don't really know like which lands correctly. And so from your standpoint, you told us a little bit why you chose body trust, but I wonder if you could just give us some insight, like, especially when we look at things like a weight inclusive approach versus a weight neutral approach, or other words that you sort of find meaning for in explaining some of this work.
Yeah, we still need to write a glossary of terms for our programs, I feel like, and it's something that we've talked about because, in our language, as we've developed our own language, but also as the language used in health at every size and all these different spaces, I think we're all developing a language. So we hear these terms weight neutral and we hear this term weight inclusive. I think when you say the term weight neutral, people immediately have more of a sense of what you mean by that than when you use the term weight inclusive. So somebody who calls themselves a weight neutral practitioner, people may understand that better than if they call themselves a weight inclusive practitioner, for instance.
Sure.
To me, the difference is weight. So here's a learning for us. We have a poster and a doorknob hanger that says, "You are entering a weight neutral zone. You are free from size assumptions, narrow beauty standards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." That's been the sign for many, many years. We recently edited this poster and this doorknob hanger to say, "You are entering a weight inclusive zone," because neutrality isn't quite enough when we're talking about oppression. We want to make inclusive spaces for people. So to me, our space is a weight inclusive zone. When people are practicing behaviors, we want them to be weight neutral. So we can use the term weight neutral to describe the type of self-care that we're recommending people engage in, that they engage in self-care that is rooted in weight neutrality, where it's not about the size, shape, or weight of their body. It's about how they want to take care of themselves to feel better in whatever ways that means for them. So to me, weight inclusive spaces, weight inclusive medicine, I think of it from that perspective versus weight neutrality is the type of self-care we're engaging in, the type of self-care we recommend. I find that many people are using weight neutral just because it translates better. If you call yourself a weight neutral provider, it's probably going to translate better to the general public than if you call yourself a weight inclusive provider.
Yeah.
But
that's the way I think about it.
Yeah, I really like the way you sort of broke down that we can use one term for spaces, which I think is really great to describe the idea that you can come into this space and it doesn't matter what space you are. You're sort of going to get, I think of the doctor's office, like, hey, I'm going for the same problem that a thin person would go for, but you're going to, a doctor might, and this has happened to me, it's like, oh, you're fat and you've got to, lose weight, instead of getting that same treatment that a thin person would get. It's sort of a more weight inclusive space would be like, you're going to get the same treatment, maybe that hopefully that, a person of a smaller size would get. That's sort of how it's translating in my brain, I think.
Right.
And to sort of, it is still weight neutral, but I like the idea of the behaviors you can practice weight neutral behaviors, which is it doesn't matter if you lose weight or gain weight. It's more about how you're taking care of yourself. So I like that.
Correct.
Yeah, I love that sort of different terms for different, things to describe.
Yeah, and when I think about the recommendations that a provider might make to a patient, we would advocate for weight neutral recommendations, right? That we don't have if someone comes in for knee pain, for instance, we don't recommend weight loss as our recommendation for the fat patient then we recommend physical therapy and omega-3 fatty acids and maybe some anti-inflammatories for somebody who's complaining of knee pain in a thin body, that our recommendations are weight neutral, right?
Yeah.
Versus, where so often the fat person is told something completely different than somebody in a thin body. So, when in our provider trainings, we're always saying, what would you recommend to somebody with the same complaints in a smaller body? That's one thing that healthcare providers can do to check their biases. If there were a person sitting across from you in a smaller body with the same complaints, what would you recommend to them when you're not going to recommend weight loss?
Right.
There are other things you're going to recommend to people. So that's another thing I think about weight neutrality is in the kinds of recommendations that we make.
Yeah, that really helps me to sort of, I've been sort of practicing health at every size for 7 years now. It's like, like anything, it evolves. And, we're talking more about the social determinants of health. And now we're talking more about weight inclusivity. So it's, even helpful for me to hear, like, this is what these terms mean. So let me ask you, you talked a little bit about yoga earlier, and I know you're a yoga instructor. And when I met you last year at Beta, you were afterwards, I think, going off to I'm going to say it wrong, but Kripalu? Is that how you
Yep.
say it? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
To do some instruction in that. And as somebody who has a kind of a vague curiosity right now in yoga, but is afraid to go into it just because of how it's sort of been co-opted by essentially diet culture, where people are going in for, this so-called hot body, I'm doing air quotes here, but I think you come at your practice obviously from a very different angle. And I wonder if you could sort of talk a little bit about that and how it relates to your work as a dietitian.
So when I started practicing yoga, I had a lot of pain, chronic pain in my body, and my massage therapist was telling me to, like, every time I saw her, she would say, "No, I really feel like if you just did yoga, like, a lot of this stuff wouldn't even be here." And after like hearing that every week for about 6 months, I was like, "Fine, I'll go to a yoga class." And I had joined a gym, and there was a yoga class at the gym, and this was in the late '90s. I'm going to date myself, and yoga wasn't quite what it is today. In the late '90s, I think Madonna was just kind of making yoga popular in the United States. So it was a Kripalu yoga class that I went to at my gym. In 2017, a Kripalu yoga teacher would not be found anywhere near a gym. I can tell you that, because it's just not the kind of yoga that gyms advocate for. I don't think what gyms and fitness centers offer is technically yoga. It's typically very fitness oriented, and yoga is not about fitness. When we practice yoga, there's a physical practice, but there's much more going on when we practice yoga. But so it's laughable to think about those days, like when this was the class offered at the gym. I mean, this was before gyms didn't have yoga mats, they didn't have blocks, they didn't have props. I brought a blanket into the gym, and that's what I practiced on. It was going to that class every week for a couple of years really changed my life. My body felt better. And a side effect was that I started to have more appreciation for my body. I started, I think my body image started to shift. I started to feel better about my body. And I was also really fascinated by this. Like I would go into an evening class and I would think when I got out, oh, I'm going to have this for dinner. And then I would leave and be like, this is what I want. And I was more connected to my body. And I found that what I had planned to eat for dinner was often different when I walked into class versus when I walked out of class. And so it was through all of this stuff that I started to, as I also was working with research participants, struggling with their own relationships with their bodies and attunement, I started to see how I was starting to get curious about how these things could be combined to help people in their relationship with food and body. There's the mindfulness practices. I think the awareness, the present moment awareness that can be so powerful in healing relationship with food and body. There's really, in yoga, we develop the ability to witness what is happening without reacting, and strengthen what we've called the voice of the witness, which to me is what they call the anthropologist in intuitive eating, this ability to notice what's going on non-judgmentally and accept what's happening simply because it's what's happening without judging what's happening. And so that practice alone, I think, can help with our relationship with food. It helps increase awareness of the inner critic. It can increase our awareness of shame and how we react to shame. It can increase awareness of patterns of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and how we often end up in these repetitive patterns or cycles that keep us, when we can investigate them, we can find freedom. And then there's the self-acceptance piece of yoga, which I think really ties in with body acceptance and healing.
Yeah.
And though, it's the physical form of practice, yoga, like the physical asana practice, is not something I bring into our work very much anymore. I'm not teaching anymore, but the breathing techniques and the ability to sit with what is and that kind of stuff is what I bring into our work.
So I'm also a yoga sort of newbie. Like I don't know any of these words. Asana, I don't know what that is. So if I were to like look for a yoga class, I mean, what are some words I should be looking for in sort of like their program, so I'm not in like a room that's 190 degrees and they're telling me to like, stand on my head?
Well, yeah, you probably don't want to start with a class labeled hot.
Okay.
Or Bikram. Bikram is the one that started hot yoga, but Bikram is very full of himself and wanted to copyright yoga, which is a 5,000-year-old practice. But Bikram thought he was the owner of had the copyright on yoga. But Bikram and hot yoga are the ones, probably anything labeled as core, power, vigorous. Sometimes you'll see vigorous, it labeled as a vigorous practice. Ashtanga is another lineage of yoga that can be great, but maybe not the best for a beginner or somebody who's super intimidated by yoga, just because Ashtanga is a lot of flow and it's a lot of sun salutations, and it probably would be overwhelming to start there. I probably wouldn't start by looking at your gym. I think gym classes are more fitness under the guise of yoga. Yoga should not be competitive. It should not feel competitive. So if you're in a class where it feels competitive and the teacher is like encouraging competition, I would be mindful of that. But, looking for beginner classes, things labeled beginner, gentle. Sometimes yoga is labeled as gentle yoga. You might like a restorative class, uses a lot of props, a lot of pillows, a lot of blankets, and it's much more relaxing. It's not going to be as much of an intense practice. It's just a gentle practice with a lot of positions where you use pillows and props to support you instead of having to hold things.
Dana, I'm so glad you mentioned, sorry.
No,
I'm so glad you mentioned the part about yoga is not meant to be competitive. Because my experience with yoga, my very limited experience with yoga back in my extreme disordered eating days was I was making it into a very competitive thing. And I hurt my back really badly for like 2 years. I was debilitated. And I realized that the problem was not the yoga. The problem was the way I was treating it. And it's just really helpful, to hear that that's actually not how. And I think that's been my hesitation to go back to it because I tend to be kind of competitive with myself, but it's not at all that. And hearing you talk about that has been really reassuring.
Yeah, it's a lot of people, especially when we're in disordered eating space or eating disordered place, the yoga that people are drawn to tends to be the more intense yoga, or just even the mentality that people show up with it can be pretty intense. A great yoga teacher is going to really help you check in with yourself about where you are coming from. Where is your intention? Where is the motivation to do this? What's the motivation to stay in the pose longer? How to make it a compassionate practice. Even a vigorous practice can be compassionate, but it takes a good teacher to be reminding us, because the ego is always going to get involved. A good teacher will remind us that even if you can bend into a forward fold and touch the floor, it's just the floor. Like I remember a teacher years ago, we were doing forward fold and of course everyone thinks that they're not a great student if they can't touch the floor. And he says, and if you can touch the floor, it's just the floor. Those of you who aren't touching the floor, just know it's just the floor.
Yeah.
It's no big deal.
It's great to bring this idea of compassion into it, I think.
I agree.
Yeah. Aaron, I think you and I need to do a yoga class together.
Okay.
That's the whole purpose of this podcast, is to make us do things
Stuff
we
together.
would never do.
All
Yeah.
right.
Well, the more we talk about physical activity, movement, self-care, really, a question we bring people back to again and again and again is this something you're doing for and with your body, or is this something you're doing to and on your body? And that really drops us into this compassionate place of, am I engaging in this activity for and with my body, or am I engaging in this activity from this place of I'm doing this to my body and on my body? Like I saw this guy running this morning, and he came up from behind me, like he was on the road and I was on the sidewalk, and I could hear him approaching, and he passed me, and he just looked miserable. It sounded like his feet, like they were just clunk, clunk, like it sounded like he was really tired, and it just got the, and I know people sometimes in running, you have to push yourself through these phases. I am not a runner. I don't relate to that at all. But I don't know if it was totally, if my take on what was happening is really what was happening. But, it just felt like it was really hard for him to put his feet in front of one another, and I just wondered, like, what was going on in his head as he was continuing to run
Right.
and push himself. And how is this for the body to be pounded on like that when you've been going for a while and you're feeling pretty exhausted?
Yeah.
But
Well, again, why language is so important, right? It's that doing it for or to, I think I love that.
And what a great parallel with eating, where I have a lot of people asking me, like, well, if I'm, starting to think about eating for health, how do I not turn that into a diet? And I think that's a great distinction too, which is, is this doing something for your health to nurture yourself versus the diet, which is you're doing something to yourself that is not something you want to actually do or will enjoy in any way.
mhm.
And I think it's just a great distinction, that we can do things that support our health, that don't feel like we're doing a number on ourselves.
No, I think it's one of my clients said, like, reframing it as nourishment has been really helpful. When we talk about nourishment, we can really widen the lens, um, because what is nourishing can be hanging out with a friend, or it could be eating this chocolate cake with a delicious cup of coffee. It can be dancing in your kitchen. It can be a variety of things. But when we talk about eating, instead of nourishment, that lens gets really narrow. So I think that idea of nourishment can be helpful. And this idea of gentle nutrition can be really challenging when people are starting to navigate that. Like, how do I know what my intention is behind making this choice? I think that's difficult to tease out. I'm still perfecting the language with clients on noticing, how do you know when you're making the choice to eat this versus that it's not coming from a dieting mind or an eating disordered place? Eh,
Yeah, I think that's such a hard conversation. I mean, it's like I think you're right. It's like so hard to really get to the meaning of some of those things when we try to think about what is gentle nutrition after years of having a diet mind or being in diet culture. It's very challenging.
Yeah, I think the one way I've talked about it is to notice what happens after you make the choice. I think when it's coming from a connected place and it's truly nourishing, it feels good. Like it feels good, but there's not this, like, look at me. Look at
Yeah.
me making this choice for myself. Like, if I'm at a restaurant and I
Yeah.
decide to eat what the culture would deem is the healthier choice, right? There's no look at me. I'm not like riding home in the car like, wow, I made such a good choice for myself.
Yeah.
Like, I make the choice and I move on with my life. It's not really that big of a deal. And I think for my clients, that's been really helpful to if they get a puffed up sense of self, um, then it's probably not rooted
Right.
in that compassionate
It's
place.
like if you have to post it to Instagram to tell everyone that this is what you ate, then you might want to look at that.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Well, Dana, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing um, so many great thoughts with us. How can people who are wanting to learn more about Be Nourished and some of the work you do, where can they find you?
We have a website, benourished.org. That's the active phrase, be nourished. I'm sure you're linking in the talk or
Totally.
the link to this, but be nourished. When I say be nourished, it doesn't necessarily translate. But benourished.org, you can find us. We have offerings for both providers and the general public. For healthcare providers, we offer a 30-day e-course promoting body trust and clinical practice. Is a great way to get to know us and our work and a different way of working with people. And then we have our certification program. That's a 6-month program. And then we also have some retreats and an e-course called No More Waiting for the General Public. And you can find all of that on our website, benourished.org.
And I will say, like I said, this is not a paid sponsor by any stretch of the imagination, but I am in the certification program, and it's life-changing. Like the depth of information and knowledge that you get as a provider is quite impressive and very very helpful in sort of coming to this work in a very different way.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks for coming on, and again, thanks for taking the time to speak with us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Nice chatting with you.
Have a good one.
You too.
Thank you for listening. This has been another Dietitians Unplugged production. You can find Aaron at bvmrd.com, and you can find Glenys at daretonotdiet.com.